So, I'm curious. Anytime Ben decides to contribute anything to public discourse, it's always valid, worthwhile, and definitely not at all, in any shape or form, mentally exhausting. So, let's go ahead and see what Ben has to say because now that Trump is lost, he has to kind of go back to his grift of fear mongering about like basic labor rights and obfuscating facts in order to make himself appear at least somewhat intelligent. So let's see what Ben's got to say.
The most obvious example of this, of course, is the teachers' unions. So teachers' unions are the most obvious example of this, of course, is the teachers' unions. So
I started that over because this clip begins with him in the middle of a sentence because I guess his editors don't like him or something. I don't know.
Teachers' unions are basically now saying they just don't want to teach ever again. Now, for my money, I'm fine with that. Seriously. I hope everybody homeschools. I hope everybody pulls their kids out of schools, puts them in parochial schools, puts them in private schools. Like, take the money out of the public school system. Take these teachers' unions at their word.
Okay, wait a minute. Well, first of all, the premise, of course, is bullshit. We all know that. Like, he likes to exacerbate and exaggerate because it's very, entertaining, I guess. I mean, it seems to resonate well. I mean, it's got a very positive feedback ratio, and it's only been up for a day, and it's almost at 200,000 views. So it works well with his audience, but obviously, like, it's not accurate. Teachers' unions right now are definitely staging a series of blocks against various school administrators in districts around the country because of the risk of infection. And this is something that I'm a little bit more personally familiar with because my mom is a teacher and she got COVID. She's okay, but yeah, she's in the age group health-wise and everything, where it was troubling. And so within my family, a lot of my family members have gotten COVID. And I'm sure you watching this, it's the same experience. I have a couple of people that I know where some family members have even died. So it's not some small thing. And frankly, I have a kid. Kids are dirty. Okay? They don't listen very well when it comes to like doing things that are kind of mildly uncomfortable, and frankly having to wear a mask all day, sitting in class, making sure you're socially distanced. I don't know. Ben has kids, doesn't he? Like, he's got to know that's got to be not the best idea. But then again, like he said, he wants to put kids in parochial and private schools. Isn't a parochial school a religious school? I don't want a scholarship. What the hell is a parochial school? Yeah, it's a religious school. Oh, and don't flame me for using Bing, okay? Bing rewards are pretty sick. But anyways, yeah, so he is within 20 seconds using like a crazy jumping off point, saying unions don't want to teach. When I'm pretty sure I've done a little bit of research on this, and just knowing this personally, through my family, that the members of teachers unions are hesitant to go back to school because there's no like real safety precautions being taken, on like a stringent level, and they don't want to get sick. They don't want super spreader events happening all over the country. I don't think that's unreasonable, but that doesn't mean to defund public schools because of that. I mean, whatever.
Private schools, like, take the money out of the public school system. Take these teachers' unions at their words. Right? They don't want to teach? Fine. I don't want you teaching my kids because I think that you guys are basically garbage at it generally anyway. Right. I think that the teachers' unions protect the worst teachers at the expense of the best teachers. I think that you value seniority over quality in your teachers. I think that you create ridiculous educational missions that have very little to do with the education of the American public school child. So you got...
Educational missions? What does that mean? So, I mean, teachers' unions serve quite a few functions. While it's definitely true that teachers' unions can protect shitty teachers because they have seniority, that's really kind of prevalent in any union. I mean, and I'm a part of a union, so that's not like a slight against unions at all. But you know, it, not every worker is a good worker. You know, and just because some workers suck, doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I'm not too sure. I mean, I guess if the point is, hey, if you have to have perfection, and then you don't have to worry about your kid's education being damaged because you'll never have a bad teacher. I mean, American educational standards are pretty low, and that's a function of our public education system not being modernized. I mean, like we still, use primarily all over the country use like the 180-day ish system that's based on like the late 19th century, early 20th century, like agrarian habits of a lot of kids when the system was, first kind of standardized. No Child Left Behind has introduced a lot of elements into it that a lot of teachers are frustrated by. In fact, whenever the union is going against like the teaching being pushed, or like certain teachings being pushed or whatnot, in my experience, it's been like the federal government is instituting like a stupid rule, and they're going against that rule, or they're lowering a certain educational standard and they're going against that standard, or like districts are purchasing like educational books from like the one company, like in like the Department of Education in Texas, that like that one, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, but it's where most books that are used throughout the country are based off of Texas education books. Let's see if I can find it. Here, see, and then moments like this is when we go to Google, because while Bing rewards are great, Bing itself, not so much. Okay, see, I remember this story. Texas Board of Education. That's what it was. Texas Board of Education Textbooks USA. Yeah, see, this is what I remember. This is an old story now. But, yeah, so, I mean, essentially, like, what's going on? Oh, no, it's not loading. Oh, well. But, yeah, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the point is that unions are often like going against these kind of standards. It's not the same thing as like unions trying to come up with standards that are like contradicting what the students need. Quite often it's usually like these actual departments that are spearheaded by a bunch of like fucking radical conservatives that are trying to shoot a kind of message, that are doing this. So I'm not exactly too sure what his point is, but I guess we'll continue and see if he makes it.
You guys don't want to come into school? Good news. Millions and millions of Americans have realized over the past year they're not sure they want you teaching their kids. But if you are a member of the Democratic Party and your big push is that public education done by teachers' unions is one of the jewels of the American system, then wouldn't you stand up to the teachers' unions at this point and say, guys, you really should go back to work? There's a new study out. That new study suggests that there really is no elevated risk for teachers above the general population. That, of course, is not a shock at all. We've known this for quite a while, that there really is no elevated public risk in terms of teachers over the general population. In fact, you would imagine they're probably at less risk generally, especially if they're teaching young kids. Young kids are not transmitting this disease in the same way that older children are. It also happens to be the case that younger...
But they're still spreading the disease. Hang on, does he link this study? Of course he doesn't. Maybe we can find this study. Study, students, teachers, COVID transmission. And there we go. What we know about transmission in schools. 3 studies highlight how low risk of in-person. Maybe this is what they mean. Oh, it's from UNM too. That's where I went to school. Let's see. Oh man, are my links just like not working today? Fucking feels bad, dude. Okay, well, I mean, based off of what I can see here, none closed for COVID transmission. I wonder if it's just like a browser issue. Let's see if Edge works. It'd be hilarious if it does. Students, COVID, teacher. There we go. What we know about transmission in schools. Wow. Yep, it's just Firefox. Nice. All right, let's see here. All right, this is current summary. Yeah, I just want a summary. There are a few outbreaks reported in schools since early 2020. Studies were limited during school closures and other stay-at-home measures. We are learning more. In most infections or COVID-19 cases reported in children, infection was acquired at home. More outbreaks reported in secondary high schools than in primary elementary schools. Studies suggest that children less than 10 years are less susceptible and less infectious than older ones. Oh, that's interesting. You know, that actually makes sense now that I think about it, kind of in contradiction to what I was saying earlier, because teenagers are assholes. So it would make sense that they would be like, yeah, bro, it won't affect me at all. Whereas, you know, you tell an 8-year-old, hey, you know, grandma could die if you get her sick, you know, they'll listen to you. School outbreaks, it was more likely that virus was introduced by adult personnel. Transmission staff to staff was most common. Among staff and students was less common. Student to student spread more rare. Which makes sense because I imagine the rules are pretty strict on like. Well, then see, if the transmission with staff to staff is most common, then it would also make sense why teachers unions would be pushing for like keeping things closed, even if they are saying that they want to reduce the risk to children, because people will listen to that, because frankly we love to dehumanize teachers and think of them as like objects that have to do what they have to do, even though we don't pay them shit, but you know, so it's a lot easier to tell people, hey, you know, maybe, you know, if we care about kids, we wouldn't go back to school, when frankly I would think this is sufficient enough reason. Hey, we're more at risk than kids are, and if we're, you know, getting sick, then we can't be at school teaching your kids. I think that's completely sufficient. But there's not a lot of data, so to me that says that because there's not a lot of data, that he's just kind of being dishonest.
Teachers, right? If you're a 22-year-old teacher for second graders, your level of risk is really, really minimal. It's much lower than you going to a bar. That's
well, so he doesn't link a study, but it doesn't say that it's minimal. Hang on. It didn't say really that it's minimal, right? Because it did say there were a few outbreaks, but that's because schools were closed. It even says that here, like the studies were limited because of closures. And this is the World Health Organization. You know? And it is true that most infections that were reported in kids were acquired at home, but I think this is also related to the fact that there were a lot more closures, and frankly, that would be the only contact point. So I'm not too sure. I would like to see what study he's referencing.
Same night. But in a bunch of different states, we've got bars that are open and schools that are closed, which is madness. According to The Hill, the Chicago's Teachers Union voted to defy Chicago Public Schools' reopening plans for teachers and staff due to coronavirus concerns, the union announced on Sunday. Yeah. The Teachers Union, for the nation's third largest school district, decided to allow all educators to conduct work remotely starting on Monday, the day kindergarten through 8th grade staff were expected to return in person. So these are specifically teachers for young kids. The CTU reported 86% of its 25,000 members participated in the electronic vote on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 71% of voting members decided to deny the district's current plan to come back to in-person learning. A CTU release said it means the overwhelming majority of you have chosen safety. CPS did everything possible to divide us by instilling fear through threats of retaliation. You still chose unity, solidarity, and to collectively act as one. By the way, this just demonstrates, once again, public sector unions are a blight on the American political system. Public sector unions which bargain collectively against the taxpayer and pay off the politicians to bargain on their own behalf. It's one of the most corrupt deals in all of American politics.
Now, you're dumb, dude. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. So first and foremost, again, like if we're gonna use this study as a reference, they care about their safety. And I think, I found an article and it went over this. But basically, like, they were just worried about getting sick. Now, obviously, some parents are pissed off about it, but, like, let's be real. A lot of the reasons why parents are pissed off about this is because you gotta work. And most of the time, as a parent, you don't have the option to just pay for, like, a daycare. Because daycares are fucking expensive. The average cost of a daycare is way above what most families can pay, especially like for extended periods of time to the degree that we're seeing right now in these times, in this era. And frankly, I don't see the problem with members of a teachers union saying, hey, I know people that have died from COVID. I have personally gotten COVID, or I know someone that's gotten COVID, and I don't feel comfortable coming back to work. And the district is basically saying, we don't really give a shit about your concerns for your health. We also don't really have everything under control because, frankly, you can't control the situation to any like really real meaningful degree. But go back to work anyway. I don't know. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And like, frankly, to his next point where he's talking about this is proof that public sector unions are a blight on society. I mean, that's a stretch. If a public sector union is basically saying, hey, we as the workforce don't feel comfortable coming back to this type of work because we feel like there's a health risk, and their health risk worry is backed up by data. So it's not like it and personal experience. So it's not like, they're saying it for no reason. It's not like they don't want to work. I mean, you don't become a teacher because you want to get rich. They like teaching. And again, some teachers suck, but like, name one job where someone doesn't suck, for fuck's sake. I mean, like, look, out of all political commentators, I think we can all agree that Ben Shapiro sucks. Yeah, so I mean, he's using a sensitive situation where members of a workforce collectively agreed that they don't want to come back to work. And he's saying that because these workers have that autonomy where they don't want to come back to work, in person too. They're still working, actually. I should clarify. They're still like doing remote learning. They're just not coming into the classroom. And because of this, unions are screwing over the taxpayer somehow. It's definitely not the fault of like the federal government or state governments not being able to manage public health crises properly. It's not that fault at all. It's definitely the fault of the unions who are made up of members who voted to not come to work in person, but instead work from home, where it is safer from COVID transmission. Especially apparently for high school. So, yeah, I don't know.
To bargain on their own behalf. It's one of the most corrupt deals in all of American politics. Maybe the most corrupt deal.
Oh, and also, too, like, is he basically saying that, like, every public sector job has to be like the military, where, like, if you disobey an order, you, like, get like disbarred or go to jail or something like this? I'm not really understanding, what his point really is here. I mean, I get that he's anti-union, but he's not like logically justifying it. Mr. Logic Boy isn't really going through with that aspect of the argument. He's just saying they're bad.
Essentially, you now have unions that pay to get politicians elected. They then negotiate with the politicians against the taxpayer, and the politicians use the union money in order to get reelected.
See, that's not true, because, like, first of all, of politicians that accept donor money, if you look at the politicians that make the most money in terms of, like, donors sending them money and all that kind of stuff, like, through dark money, even if you want to consider super PACs, it's not unions that are making up the majority of that money. It's people that help fund shows like the Ben Shapiro show. Natural gas and oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, stuff like this. And this is not just Republicans it's Republicans and, a lot of Democrats too, you go on like Open Secrets, unions definitely contribute to a lot of political campaigns. My union contributed to political campaigns, but it's not the same thing as like, because my union contributed to a political campaign and like wanted a certain campaign to win through like helping with like canvassing or something like that, that we're buying off a politician. That makes no sense. Like, by this logic, like if you donate to a politician, you're buying them off. That's not necessarily true, right? Like as a rule, like it comes like the point comes from like the volume of money, right? Like if a union gives like $1 million, over the course of its members, because the union itself doesn't always give like a fuckload of money. They'll sometimes establish super PACs, but like we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of dollars at most for extremely large national unions. That pales in comparison to like, natural gas and oil companies and fucking pharmaceutical industry, who contribute billions of dollars for the sole purpose of like, protecting their self-interest within a marketplace. Whereas like what is a union contributing to a politician for? Like if a teachers union contributes to a politician, they want that politician to improve working conditions, increase funding, access to education, like upgrade tools, like make sure that the actual sites of the school are like modernized, like in the self-interest of like teachers. Like this is such a cynical viewpoint, and it makes sense though why he's making it, because it's obfuscating from like the real issues of money and politics, and instead saying that unions are the issue with money and politics. Like, I don't know.
It's truly impressive legal grift. The Chicago Sun-Times labeled the vote unusually close for CTU labor actions because 94% of voting members usually decide when to strike. The Chicago district's official sent a letter to families on Sunday saying the return date for teachers will be delayed until Wednesday to allow for more time for negotiations and to avoid risking disruption to student learning. Now again, there's no science to back this. The science to suggest that these teachers are at risk and that they can't come back until X, Y, or Z, it's just nonsense. It's not true.
Well, again, like, I wouldn't say that it's like hyperbolic or anything. It's not like if they go back, they're gonna die, right? That would be bullshit. But to suggest there's no science, I mean, that's not true. Again, this is the most recent study I can find from the WHO from October. So unless there's some other study that he's referencing, because he doesn't link it, I'm looking in his description. There's no link anywhere. So I'm not too sure like what study he's referring to. He doesn't show it on screen. So I don't know what study he's referring to. I would like to look at it and see what the actual language is, because oftentimes with political commentators like this, they will like pick a certain sentence that fits their viewpoint and then like ignore like the summary, which often making like the contradictory point of what the study actually says, for example. So, but I mean, it's not it's not true that there's no science. I mean, there is science that suggests that like COVID cases are like evening out, but they're still on the rise. And like if you look at the current situation right now in America, baby, this is how we do it here. We got 25 million cases so far. Our compound growth is 8%, and for a country as large as ours, that's kind of staggering. We do have we have people recovering. It's not like, I don't know. It's not. It's trending in trending in kind of like a flat way as of right now because of just the fact of the amount of people that have gotten it, where we are actually kind of hitting that cause see how it's like kind of flattening a little bit, like it's at the beginning of the flattening, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. This doesn't seem like the right move. Because if we were to try and like fully open everything up, we do risk having the spike again. I mean, I know it can only spike so much because eventually like some form of herd immunity is going to happen, but I don't know. It seems irresponsible to be advocating for this kind of shit right now. I mean, he must really live in a bubble if he doesn't have to worry about his kids or anyone he cares about getting sick like this.
In fact, there are serious questions as to whether this particular teacher strike is legal under the regulations. But it's not just Chicago's teachers' unions. It's in Ohio as well. Yep. According to WTOL, the largest teachers' unions in the state are responding after Governor Mike DeWine announced 96% of public school districts in Ohio have signed a form committing to in-person learning by March 1st. The unions, including the Toledo Federation of Teachers, say in a joint statement that Governor DeWine is using vaccines as a bargaining chip to open schools by March 1st. The statement says teachers, students, families, and cities will face dire consequences if schools are pressured to reopen before it is safe to do so. Okay, it's just a lie. It's not true.
Okay, but all right. So, but why are they saying it's a bargaining chip? Can we find this article? Let's see. Can we find it? What was the exact quote? Bargaining chip, vaccines, Ohio Teachers Union. Okay, we're Cleveland.com. Oh yeah, Firefox isn't working for some reason. Let's do this. Man, what is going on with my shit? Unfortunate. Okay, well, I wanted to see what exactly they're talking about. Let's see. I wonder if it's being specifically. Maybe it's got some kind of portal issue that's going on. Nope. Fuck it. It ain't working.
They're pushing that. New Jersey teachers, they say that they don't want to come back until every single student in these schools is tested. Again, that is nuts. First of all, the false positive rate on the tests alone would probably make it impossible to open the schools.
Why?
But beyond that, are you insane? Okay, the children are not the chief vector of the transmission. There's more danger of you hanging out in the teachers' union with the other teachers than of you teaching the kids.
I mean, that is true. Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, like, there's not a lot of data on it. Like, the only data that we have does suggest that kids catch it more at home than they do at school. But that doesn't mean that there's no risk.
Okay, perhaps the greatest example of this insanity is members of the Washington Teachers Union claiming that reopening schools for in-person learning is an example of white supremacy, and saying that if we value the mental health of students, that is a form of white privilege. According to the Daily Wire, echoing comments made by the Chicago Teachers Union months ago that reopening schools for in-person instruction is both racist and sexist, the president of the Pasco Association of Educators, Scott Wilson, made a series of unhinged, controversial remarks during a Pasco school board meeting, according to our friend Jason Rantz over at KTTH. The comments were captured on video as the Board of Education conducts its meetings on Zoom amidst the coronavirus pandemic. This particular teachers union head compared the effort to reopen schools to the riot at the U.S. Capitol. Wilson said, "There are decisions to be made. You stand on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol as people break down barriers and head to the doors. Do you follow? You stand at the governor's mansion. The crowd breaks down barriers to enter the grounds. Do you follow, or do you choose a different way? We must not ignore the culture of white supremacy and white privilege." He said, "We speak of equity. We speak of the care of students, yet we listen and attend to voices saying, 'Reopen everything. I'm free to breathe,' supporting white privilege." Okay, in reality, the people who are the most harmed by all of these stay-at-home orders have been children who are black and Hispanic. Because disproportionately, kids who are black and Hispanic go to public schools. And particularly their parents need them in the public school so they can go work.
Okay, but all right. So, apparently, like, none of my browser capabilities are working right now, so I can't verify this quote and see if it's out of context or not. Union, teacher, white supremacy, schools. Yeah, and everything that I'm seeing here is coming from Breitbart, Daily Caller. Man, this is frustrating that I can't verify any of this shit because nothing's working.
Wilson said, "You stand at the government, not ignore of the care of students, yet we, in reality, the people who are the most harmed by all of these stay-at-home orders have been children who are black and Hispanic."
Oh yeah, and that's the thing too. Like just because so if the person is making a comment on like power relations within the existing dynamic, and they're basically, to me, based off of what he's saying, if we're just gonna assume he's being honest, which he's not, but let's just assume he is, and just take him at his word right now, because I can't verify shit for some reason with whatever's going on with my computer. But it sounds to me like it's making a comment on power dynamics and power relations within like administrators versus students, and that is something that is dictated by like a white patriarchal society. So we do live in a white patriarchal society. We do live in a white supremacist country. But then again, he's the kind of person that would say like, well, we don't live in a white supremacist country because Barack Obama was president. But like that's not, it doesn't prove his point, because the critique is about power relations. And frankly, the point that he's making where black and Hispanic kids, kids of color, are the ones that are most negatively affected by this because they're the ones that have to rely on public school. They don't have the same access to parochial and private schools that white families do, kind of proves the point that union leader would be saying, because the white families, more often than not, would be able to insulate their kids from COVID. So if things are pushed to be reopened, they benefit more than a family that is poorer. That's a family, of people of color that have to rely on that school over like a private setting or anything like this. And if they catch COVID, if they're in that situation that he's describing where they're having to rely on this for economic reasons, then what if they get a hospital bill that like puts them into a state of, financial disarray? So these are things that families do have to think about. And more often than not, those families are poorer families, and more often than not, poorer families in America, due to a lot of reasons related to white supremacist power structures, are black and brown. So even if we're taking him at the merit of what he's saying, taking his words honestly and assuming they're not taken out of context to any degree, it's not wrong. Like, what that person's saying is not incorrect. It might be inflammatory, but it's not incorrect.
Because disproportionately, kids who are black and Hispanic go to public schools.
Yeah.
And particularly their parents need them in the public school so they can go work.
Yeah. Just like
because in single-parent households, which are disproportionately in black and Hispanic families, if you can't drop your kid at school, how exactly are you going to go to work that day?
This is the exact point that I just made. And he's not making the point he thinks he's making, but...
And this is madness. So Joe Biden was asked about all of this, right? So Joe Biden gets asked about the teachers' unions and whether they should return to schools. And Joe Biden sidesteps the question. Because, again, it's amazing. You hear all the time about the corruption of money in politics. You heard this from the Bernie Sanders crew. Well, there's so much money in politics. It's so terrible. Also, I would love to receive a $100 million investment from the teachers' unions to go and door knock for me.
Oh my God, Ben, never do impressions. Your voice is too nasally. Like, even if you try and make it, like, tiny, like, you try and make your voice, like, a little lower, it's so tiny, you can't handle it. Yeah, just shut the fuck up, dude, like, honestly.
I mean, it's incredible. They're explicitly bargaining against the interests of their own students. And then Joe Biden is out there defending them. I mean, it is a high-level form of corruption, right in plain sight. The fact...
Well, I mean, yeah, he does have to defend unions because it is true that unions are... out of all the unions in America, by and large, they vote for Democrats. Because Democrats, while shitty, are not anti-union. Some Democratic representatives and such are not, like, strong enough, for sure. But, like, they're not anti-union. Whereas the Republicans openly want to dismantle them. So, I mean, that's just like a logistical, that makes sense. So for Biden to pay lip service to that is unsurprising. He's being really alarmist about it, but it's just political rhetoric. I mean, at the end of the day, like, that's Biden making a political calculation. So it's not him being like nefarious backroom deals, because the unions were not the majority of his donor money. So
that labor unions have this much power with our federal and state governments is nuts. It's nuts.
Okay, but I mean, like, this much power is a little misleading, right? Like, these unions do have some semblance of power, but it's only because the workers are a part of the union. Like, workers are workers, doesn't matter what part of the economy you're in. Frankly, if there were more private sector unions, this shit would also be happening. You know, like that union vote that I haven't checked on the result of it, but the union vote that was going on in Alabama in the Amazon warehouse. I mean, this has all been spawned by COVID, and the working conditions right now in Amazon warehouses across the country are insane. I used to work for Amazon. I've seen how they just run people into the fucking ground. Those Amazon warehouse workers are some of the hardest workers I've ever seen in my life. They're like, and they have no job security. You know, they have no job security. And so for a union to step in and say, hey, we give a shit about your public health, about your health and the public health, frankly, by extension, but we give a shit about your health specifically, I think that's important. I don't see how that is crazy that public sector unions actually have this power. And I think that's something that the private sector needs to have more of. Of course, he's against that, you know. So I think that's honestly the main crux of his issue is that, you know, because workers help you make money. Like, Ben Shapiro doesn't do this by himself, right? I'm sure he pays his staff handsomely and everything like that. Smaller companies that make a lot of money like this can usually get away with that kind of stuff, you know. Like Linus Media Group, for example, on YouTube. They're I can't imagine him wanting to unionize his workforce because I bet he treats his people really well, you know, because, you know, it's a small business. He seems to have ethics that he gives a shit about. And yeah. And so at the end of the day, he's a piece of shit that doesn't like unions. And that's really the core of this. Because everything so far that he's been saying is basically unions are bad. Like, just because a workforce can say, we don't think this is safe, we're not going to come to work, and not get, like, direct retaliation from their bosses in the form of, like, them getting fired outright during a fucking pandemic, shows the strength of unions in a good way, not a bad way. But then again, that's why he's been trying to undermine, like, the risk. He's been saying that, like, you know, it's not even that big of a deal getting COVID, first and foremost. Kids aren't a vector of transmission. But teachers going amongst themselves is more of a vector of transmission, which is also, in my opinion, a good enough justification to warrant remote learning. But yeah, I don't know.
Power with our federal and state governments is nuts. It's nuts.
But they don't have that much power at the end of the day. Like, the fact that they have to be like, hey, pandemic is happening. I'm not going to come to work in person, but I'll still work from home. And we're still having, like, a debate about it, and there's still, like, risk of retaliation even with these kind of union, like, you know, contracts in place and such. Like, yeah, it's better than no power, but it's not, like, dominating the public sphere at all, like the public sector at all.
And the fact that the National Labor Relations Act is so biased in favor of collective bargaining that would be considered collusion if it were done by employers, but as soon as it is done by employees, it is now considered not collusion, but something magical.
Well, if employers... Well, hang on. Employers do this. Employers do... Okay, well, hang on. This depends on what he means by employers. Because collective bargaining is, hey, we're all getting together, and we have, like, a set of demands. And we're going to come in, we're going to start a negotiation with our boss about what demands we want met. And then you negotiate with the boss and come to some kind of an agreement, some terms. And then the people that are collectively bargaining vote on those terms. And if it passes, it passes. If not, you go back into renegotiations. If employers were to do this, like, how would that even work? Like, inversely. I mean, like, in right to work states and at will employment states, the boss can just fire you for no reason. They can just say, hey, they can not like you personally, but then be like, oh, your performance isn't up to par, sorry, we have to let you go. And that's completely illegal. So like, blackballing happens in certain industries, not every industry, and I think it is technically illegal. I mean, at least I hope it is. But I mean, it still happens with a wink and a nod, you know, like, especially in like creative arts industries. I don't know. I don't know what he means, because if he's talking about like collusion, then maybe he's talking about like a cartel forming. But a cartel forming, which is like, hey, I'm business A of the salt industry and you're business B of the salt industry, and we control the whole market together, so we'll just go ahead and dictate prices to our benefit, which is effectively a monopoly, but it's not technically a monopoly. That's a cartel, a financial cartel. It's a monopolistic practice to some degree. But that's not the same thing as collective bargaining, because collective bargaining is all the little pieces that help you make your money coming together saying, hey, we're not going to help you make your money anymore unless you give us give in to these demands. And those demands are usually things like higher wages, better health insurance, that kind of stuff. So I'm not too sure how that comparison can be made accurately.
The NLRA is a terrible piece of legislation.
No, it's not.
Okay, but put that aside. The very existence of public sector unions is, in most cases, a blight on the republic. But here is Joe Biden.
No, it's not.
This is just an example. Refusing to condemn teachers' unions that are cutting directly. Here's Captain Science here. As kids are being put out of school all across the nation, again, even though we're reopening outdoor dining and we're reopening indoor dining, here's Joe Biden.
Do you believe, sir, that teachers should return to schools now?
I believe we should make school classrooms safe and secure for the students, for the teachers, and for the help that's in those schools maintaining the facilities. We need new ventilation systems in those schools. We need testing for people coming in and out of the classes. We need testing for teachers as well as students. And we need the capacity to know that, in fact, the circumstance in the school is safe and secure for everyone.
Okay, so basically, I'm just going to avoid all of this. By the way, my kids have been in school since the beginning of the year. No problem. And my kids two of them under the age of 7 are in school. And there's been no problem. They've taken precautions like masking. They put up a little plexiglass on the tables. The teachers are there. The teachers have not been infected. But apparently it's the end of the world again.
But we know his kids go to like a private school. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like his kids are in a classroom that only has like 15 kids, in the class kind of thing. Like most public schools are especially in densely populated areas, are running north of like 25 to 30 kids per classroom. I know that when I lived in Albuquerque and I was going to high school, that was not uncommon. When you're out, especially like on the west side and the more poorer parts of the city, and especially like downtown, this is a common issue where you have, 30 kids per classroom. And it's a lot harder socially distancing. You're not going to be able to put up plexiglasses as commonly or as a general standard because, frankly, the schools, they don't have the funding. So, I mean, I don't know. This is deliberate misinformation at this point. He's saying, hey, my kid's in the private school where the teachers are paid really well and the classroom count isn't as high, where they can afford the materials to be able to actually create safe social distancing measures. They're fine, so your kids will also be fine in a completely different environment where none of those amenities are afforded to them. It's dishonest.
The willingness of the media to overlook the insane corruption of keeping millions and millions, tens of millions of school kids at home so teachers' unions can sit at home and get rich.
But that's not what's happening. These teachers are still working. Dude, this guy's a fucking idiot. So, they're still working. They're just working from home, okay? They're doing remote learning. They're not working. If anything, the majority of teachers that I've been in contact with personally, like just in my personal life, and just that I've seen like in the local news and stuff like this, they're very frustrated because they don't like remote learning. It adds a lot of extra workload onto the teacher. And it's not as engaging as a classroom setting. Like, this is just dishonest.
I mean, really, the unions are getting rich, not the people who are members of the unions themselves.
The union dues are still the same. What are you you're stupid, dude.
It's super corrupt. How tied in is the Biden administration to these unions? So tied in that Randy Weingarten was originally considered a possibility for Secretary of Education, the head of the American Federation of Teachers. But here she was this week saying that she stands behind teachers who are refusing to go back to school.
Of course, we stand 100% behind the Chicago Union, but, the issue really is, just like we said last summer when we said we would support these safety strikes, the issue is we know that in-school learning is really important and vital for children. And so we are trying to take the steps in different places to make that happen.
Okay, so, yeah, those teachers' unions, they're all for the students, though. Facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, so that's a yikes from me. And honestly, like, the crazy thing is like, it's like it is almost like he doesn't know. Because he speaks with such conviction about it, And then people just, of course, rely on their own personal experience, you know what I mean? Like, in my area. See, and the thing is like, teachers' unions aren't the problems. It's public health policy. If we had dedicated billions and billions of dollars toward, like, actually retrofitting these schools with, like, high-quality ventilation systems, giving teachers hazard pay, and public workers, and frankly, all workers hazard pay, increasing funding for schools to specifically be spent on, like, social distancing requirements so that, like, they can either add more classrooms so that the 30 count per head isn't as much of an issue, build those shitty little temporary units, at least for the time being, to accommodate this. Like, there were measures that we could have taken as a federal government that we just didn't take. And see, because he misleads people, they're like, just lazy and like getting money and not having to work. These teachers are still working. They're still working. They're still creating lesson plans. They're still fucking teaching kids over a goddamn webcam fucking Zoom call. It's not the same thing as they're just, like, basically getting paid vacation like cops do when they murder black people. The point that he is making, though, about bars being open and schools being closed, though, unfortunately, he misses the mark. It's like he's almost there, because that is also bullshit. But the thing is that these state economies rely on these industries making money, especially, like, restaurant, food and service industry, tourism industries, especially in areas like Florida, certain parts of California, and especially a lot in the Midwest and stuff like this. And the thing is like, because these states are getting no federal support whatsoever and haven't been for the past year, you're putting them in between a rock and a hard place. Like, yes, you have to care about public safety and social distancing guidelines and stuff like this, but at the other end of the stick is our economy is completely built on consumerism. And so whether or not a lot of these people have jobs is dependent upon if the industries are open to the public. And it's like, this is a critique of public health policy, but he's blaming teachers' unions. Basically saying, because teachers' unions have some semblance of power in the sense that they can collectively bargain and go on strike, that bars also being open at the same time shows that they're hypocritical. I mean, I guarantee you, if, like, the people that worked at that bar were guaranteed to get paid their check but to stay home and socially distance, they would do that. But they can't do that because we live in an economy where you have to work or you fucking lose your home. You can't buy food. This is utter nonsense. At the end of the day, can't trust these motherfuckers. So, you know what? I think that's gonna kill the vibes for me tonight.